The money wasn't the most valuable thing stolen. At 2:14 inches the morning, a series of digital intrusions began moving through the global banking system. They weren't hacking SWIFT in the dramatic way you see in movies. Instead, they quietly manipulated it. In global finance, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication doesn't move money itself. It's the messenger, a trusted language that lets 11,000 banks in 200 countries communicate. At 2:14 a.m., that language was used to send a $4 billion lie. Fraudulent payment messages, perfectly formatted and authenticated with stolen credentials, entered the correspondent banking workflow. These messages looked real enough for the automated systems of 3 major US connected financial institutions to process. By the time the system detected the problem and stopped the flow, $4.2 billion had already started moving. At first, Washington thought it understood the attack. The code markers looked North Korean, and the command and control setup also pointed to North Korea. The method, leveraging trust in the correspondent banking chain, matched the tactics of the Lazarus Group. Then, during the classified investigation, one sentence appeared: false flag not excluded. That line caused more trouble than the stolen money. The Treasury Department wanted quick sanctions. The National Security Council wanted a wider deterrence plan. Cyber Command considered offensive actions. The intelligence community wanted more caution. 10 days later, news of their disagreement leaked to the press. The attackers now had something more valuable than money: a view into Washington's inability to respond quickly. To understand why the $4.2 billion were just bait, you need to understand the correspondent chain. Thousands of banks don't connect directly. Instead, they use a few intermediary correspondent banks. Sending money across borders means sending a SWIFT message to a correspondent, and everyone trusts these messages completely. The 2016 Bangladesh bank theft showed a weakness. Attackers used fake SWIFT instructions and almost stole $1 billion, but a single typo stopped them. Downstream systems accepted fraudulent messages as legitimate instructions. The money didn't vanish. The system simply followed orders from the wrong source. By the time a human received the first alert at a Manhattan correspondent bank, the settlement paths were already in motion. In high finance, settlement marks the point of no return. The digital promise of money becomes a legal fact. The attackers didn't need physical access. They just needed to convince the system that the vault was open. Within 2 days, Washington's interagency process became chaotic. The forensic evidence was confusing. Most experts saw signs of North Korea: Beagle Boys tools, certain encryption, and server timestamps, all typical of Lazarus. But some noticed odd details. Some account patterns, like money moved in advance through shell companies, looked more like Iranian methods. Some code was even made obvious, as if it was meant to be traced back to Pyongyang. This opposing view disrupted the response. If the attack was North Korean but used Iranian methods, or the other way around, then the usual US responses might not work. The mood in the Treasury building was tense, with people tired and working under pressure. But the real problem was disagreement. Treasury sanctions experts wanted to act fast. With money still moving, they thought it was urgent to identify the attackers and impose sanctions to stop a final payout. They saw the false flag warning as a roadblock, a detail that let $4 billion slip away. On the other side, the National Security Council strategists had a different focus. Their job is not just to punish, but to prevent future attacks. They asked, what will stop this from happening again? If the US sanctions the wrong group, it doesn't just lose credibility, it shows the real attacker that their false flag worked. It gives them a guide for hiding from American power. The NSC wanted an offensive cyber operation, sometimes called a cost imposition operation. They didn't just want to freeze accounts. They wanted to destroy the servers and take down the attacker's infrastructure. The debate was no longer about the $4.2 billion. It was about how to find the truth in a digital world. Treasury thought the NSC was delaying an urgent financial response. The NSC thought Treasury was rushing into a mistake that could hurt US deterrence for years. This was the institutional friction the attacker had hoped for. For 10 days, the debate continued privately. The $4.2 billion remained in legal and digital uncertainty. Banks couldn't act, stuck between their duty to process transactions and the government's informal requests to pause. Then, someone leaked a classified memo to a major news outlet. The leak described the attack, the false flag warning, and showed that the US government couldn't agree on who was responsible. Exactly which indicators would cause indecision in Washington? Consider the human stakes in that room over those 10 days. A Treasury analyst knows that every hour of delay makes recovery of the money more difficult and increases the risk to correspondent banks. An NSC strategist knows that retaliating against the wrong country could start a conflict or escalation they're not ready for. The paralysis did not stem solely from confusion, but also from the rigid structure of the interagency process. Responsibility for quick action is split among agencies with different goals. There is no clear chain of command for incidents that cross both financial and national security lines. Even when analysts flagged urgent risks, approval processes and information sharing slowed everything down. Each agency needed consensus, and competing priorities led to a standstill. Improvements could start with clear crisis escalation plans, giving interagency teams authority to act, and upgrading real-time intelligence centers to break down silos before the next crisis. This wasn't a technical failure, it was a failure of decision-making. The attacker didn't just test the bank's security, they tested the government's ability to decide what kind of attack it faced. If you can make your enemy argue for 10 days, you've already won. You've revealed their red lines, forensic thresholds, and internal feuds. The attacker didn't just steal data, they stole the United States response, MAP. The story didn't finish with a massive cost imposition operation or a grand sanctions package. It ended with a quiet, uncomfortable reorganization of how the interagency process handles cyber financial incidents. But that reorganization hasn't fully closed the scene. The Bangladesh bank theft taught the world that the plumbing of global finance was vulnerable to anyone with a stolen login. The $4.2 billion attack taught the world that the brain of global response is even more fragile. The money didn't vanish, but the certainty of American deterrence did. The story didn't finish with a big cost imposition operation or sweeping sanctions. Instead, it ended with a quiet, uneasy change in how the interagency process handles cyber financial incidents. But this change didn't fully fix the problem. The Bangladesh bank raid showed that the plumbing of global finance is vulnerable to anyone with a stolen login. The $4.2 billion attack showed that the brain of the global response is even more fragile. The money didn't disappear, but America's faith in its deterrence did. National coordination steps, and tailored escalation responses for false flag operations. Absent clear, actionable reforms, the next crisis will exploit the same fracture lines, only with higher stakes. Pay attention to swift anomalies over the next 18 months. Look for small, frequent tests in new places. Watch for transfers that seem like mistakes or instructions canceled at the last minute. These aren't technical errors. They are an adversary. Testing the map they got from the leak. They're learning how much confusion they need to cause another 10-day freeze. They're searching for the next false flag that will stall decision makers. To turn warning signs into action, institutions should use layered monitoring methods. Analysts need to flag and report any unusual SWIFT activity. For example, unexpected transfers, odd or frequent cancellations to a central risk review team right away. Set up automatic alerts for anomalies that cross risk thresholds so both the compliance and cybersecurity teams can review them in real time. When escalation is needed, a set process should address emergency cases straight to executives and interagency contacts who can act within minutes, not days. Finally, share active threat indicators across institutions immediately, so confusion in one bank doesn't spread through the whole correspondent chain. The $4.2 billion was just the entry fee. The real prize was the leak. As long as Washington is split between those who want to punish the obvious and those who want to find the real culprit, the attackers keep their advantage. Next time fraudulent messages move at 2:14 in the morning, The real question won't be how much did they take, it will be, do we have the courage to decide who they are? The aha moment is realizing the attack wasn't just against the banks, it was aimed at the decision cycle of the world's most powerful institutions. It showed that if you can turn an individual sentence like false flag not excluded into something more powerful than a $4 billion theft, you found a major advantage in the modern era. The money was just a distraction. The leak was the real damage, and its effects are still being felt long after the accounts were frozen. People often see cyber war as a fight using zero-day and exploits, but this was really a battle over perception. By deliberately confusing the forensic evidence, the attacker made sure there was no clear, smoking gun. They understood that in a democracy, uncertainty leads to inaction. They used America's strengths, debate, and inquiry, and turned them into weaknesses. The $4.2 billion attack wasn't just a theft. It served as a test of government response, and the results were made public. Now, consider the correspondent chain again. Every day, trillions of dollars move through this system, protected only by trust in a standard message. The attackers showed they can manipulate that trust to cause a crisis. They used the money to test how US agencies would respond, watching for predictable problems. But this isn't just an American issue. The correspondent network depends on international faith and collaboration. No single country can protect these flows alone. Real resilience will need worldwide coordination among regulators, central banks, and financial institutions to share threat intelligence, standardize responses, and close the gaps that attackers use across borders. The leak was the ultimate clue, showing the attackers wanted access to the whole system, not just the money. The next time you see a headline about a massive cyber theft or a stopped bank break-in, don't just focus on the dollar amount. Notice the delays and disagreements between agencies. Look for false flag warnings hidden in the news. That's where the real battle is happening, not in the bank's servers, but in the decision-making process. The $4.2 billion is just a number. The leak is a strategy. As the situation becomes more uncertain, that strategy will decide who comes out on top. To avoid paralysis and enable quick, coordinated responses, institutions need a clear decision-making framework for uncertain cyber incidents. This should include early joint escalation protocols between the finance and national security teams, a checklist to quickly gather and sort evidence, interagency crisis teams with the authority to act, and decision points for temporary measures such as freezing